Good afternoon and welcome to Nkhani Zathu, our stories radio program. This program comes to you every Tuesday at 13:30 to 14 hours on Pan African Radio. I am your host, Rina Kasongo, and it is very exciting once more as we discuss with creators, writers, producers, authors, readers, and other stakeholders discussing the African and literary sector. Which is why today on Nkhani Zathu, we are discussing storytelling for change. On today's program, we have Natasha, who I am going to allow to introduce herself, and then we get right into the program. Natasha, welcome to Nkhani Zathu.
Thank you so much, Rina. Thank you for having me. Lovely to be here today. My name is Natasha Banda. I am an author, but before an author, I'm a mother. A businesswoman when I put the hat on.
Okay.
And a sister, friend, woman of Zambia. So
everything. Today we're speaking to Natasha, the author.
Thank you.
Yeah, and what I find interesting about you is how you in how you bring out stories. You collaborate with other people, I believe, different parts of Africa and the world, I would say. But what's important is how you make people realize to say what you may have thought to be may not be what exactly. Like, for example, there was a story you shared that happened in 1972, some audio clip. But it's just where someone would think to say, okay, I didn't know this is the actual case. Of course, we'll talk more about that, but I just wanted to put it out there and say, Natasha doesn't just work, she doesn't just do storytelling for Zambia alone, but she does it for every other person out there, wherever you are, whichever part of the world. She makes sure that people really understand the African narrative, and which is why Nkhani Zathu exists. We exist to promote Zambian and African stories. Yeah. So, moving forward, why is storytelling important to you?
Storytelling is important to me for a number of reasons. The first one is that I love it so much. It's very important to me, important enough to know that there are periods that you must give up something in order to pursue the story. And sometimes, and I love that it reciprocates. So as much as I love it and it's that important to me, I feel that I'm as important to it because it calls me. So it's, first of all, it's that I have a relationship with it. Okay, and in pursuing it, I have to be disciplined and there and present and open to understanding the story that wants to be told in order for me to tell it. So it's a very special relationship, and I'm grateful for that privilege, first of all.
when did this relationship with
storytelling I think I always was an avid reader as a child. I have some aunties from Luanda. When I was small and I'd go to Luanda, they'd always say I'd literally have an audience because I would either be singing or telling them some kind of story. So I think when I'm older, I would always answer very clinically and say 5 years ago I began to write. But if I look back, it's always just was something that was also part of our way of doing things, our way of being together in communion. And later on in school, I was always in a book. If as a child, I was usually reading ahead of what I should have been reading. I would have been reading novels maybe by age 9 or 8. I just was consumed. I loved reading. And I believe even now, which I tell everybody, in order to write successfully, you should be a reader first. So it's just always been there. And I've always just had a kind of family that encourages books of all kinds, stories of all kinds, since I was very young. So it's very hard to just say it started here. Mm-hmm. It's just always been part of the journey and always manifested in different ways.
Okay. So I'm guessing then that family also has added to you loving storytelling because they've supported you, and I believe you've had moments where they tell you certain stories from the village and you're able to connect and want to tell a story. Have you had those moments?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Always. But also in our family, the culture or the practice was that at least once a year we were sent to the village. And not just sent to the village, we were sent with our cousins. So if our cousins were in different parts of the country or the world or going through whatever we're going through individually, once a year we were brought together at home And combined, we'd all have our different stories, our different perspectives, and then we'd have our grandmother and our grandmother's people come, and then people come. So there were stories everywhere, and it always meant just that much more imagination, or things to play with, or surprise, or shock, or wow, So, yes, family and the way we've done things has always contributed, I think, to that.
Okay. How would you describe the use of storytelling for change?
So currently there's a debate as to whether storytelling should just be for the sake of art, like art for the sake of art, or art just for the sake of the love of it, right, or the fun of it. But I think there are different approaches. So you have some creators who create specifically with intention, purely for social change, and those who just want to tell a story. And I think both sides is fine. But I do believe that depending on the intention and the content of your work, even though you do not intend to cause change, you can be very surprised as to how much immersive storytelling can affect change, can cause people to see themselves maybe differently, or to live and experience the life or situation of someone else in a place they've never been to, but they can connect. And by the end of those 300 pages or whatever it is, they have a mindset shift, or they just have a feeling, or they're compelled to do something else maybe they wouldn't have done before they read that piece of work. So I believe storytelling is powerful. It can be as polarizing as it can be uniting. So it's nothing to be ignored, and it's part of everything we do every day, whether we're reading the news, whether my son is asking me for an allowance because of this or that. Someone will tell the story in order to persuade. So story really is argument, and it's a presentation. For fiction particularly, of which for me that's more my area, it allows us to sometimes tell the truth or give a mirror that reflects society through a lie, because fiction is a lie, right?
So you guys are liars.
But you find the truth, hopefully, within the pages of that lie, within that pages of that presentation, and hopefully it offsets or encourages people to go in a direction, sometimes that you don't even plan for. But the hope is that you do affect a reader enough that they either want to change something about themselves or their lives or the society, or even just look at it differently, just to look at the world differently. So yes, I think it's really powerful.
Okay. So specifically in your journey, how has this journey of storytelling for change been impactful? Like, what feedback maybe have you received from people that you think, okay, yeah, I think well done, Natasha, you did a good job?
I don't know when I'll be able to say well done. It's a journey, which at first began from my love of the story, right? So you find the story, it comes to you, you pursue it. So when you begin like that, I don't think you have the expectation of anything changing or impacting. But I think when the reviews start to come back, or people just stop you and say, oh wow, or they send you a message, or you read it on Goodreads, or whatever it is, and you find it can be very moving when someone says, for instance, I related to that character so much because as a child I went through XYZ, or this period of time in history was very vague to me, but after reading that, I understand it that much better, and it's made me want to go and research it further. So those kind of things have happened, or just people just saying, oh, I love this person, or even saying I don't really like your work because of XYZ. It's all, I think where I like to say the magic happens is when the reader interacts with the work that you've done. I think the important thing is the interaction, and getting that response, whatever it is really, it's very moving. But it's just great because it's when you're writing a book here, it's a one-way conversation at the time you're writing. But then by the time you're having this conversation, it comes two ways, and with multiple people. So in relation to change, I wouldn't be able to measure or say that, but I would be able to say that just the interaction with the reader being able to interpret things how they want, how how their world interprets it for them is really, 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 really gratifying.
Interesting. I've interacted with a number of authors and writers, and they have shared how gratifying it is when readers get to relate to the character or just the writing. I'm yet to find out myself, but I'm guessing that with all you've described it, you definitely feel warm whenever you receive such feedback.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're tuned into Nkhani Zathu, Our Stories radio program on Pan African Radio. This program comes to you by Sotren Publishers in collaboration with Pan African Radio. Sotren Publishers aim to develop, produce, and promote African and Zambian stories that are promoting indigenous values, knowledge, and literature. So this is what we do as well on Nkhani Zathu. We ensure that we discuss all things relating to the Zambian literary and arts sector. That is why we have Natasha today, helping us understand her journey of storytelling for change. Stick around. So Natasha, what are the intentions behind the kind of stories you tell? Is it to change systems, so social? Like what really inspires you, I would say, to tell some of these stories?
Wow. I think, okay, first of all, immediately let me say, I don't write a story intending to change anyone or anything. I write a story because it either jumps out at me or there's characters in it that jump out at me. And their stories to me are so interesting that I want to pursue them. I want to get to know more. So I end up going usually on a research path first, and then getting to know them as well. So it's like two ways. So getting to know them as people, but also as I research, I get to understand their world. So for instance, let me be exact. For instance, I could have a character that jumps out at me who is not necessarily in this time, but is in the 70s or the 60s. That means I don't know what their world is like. I don't know what butter they use on the bread in the morning. I don't even know if they have butter. I don't know if they have shoes or they don't have shoes. I don't know what. I need to now go and pursue that. I meet them as a person, but then the more I research, the more that person becomes real.
Okay.
So having said that, I've even lost the question because
Like,
I'm so taken already.
It's fine.
It's fine.
What inspires the story, the kind of stories that you tell?
So first of all, it's the people. That's what I'm trying to say. I don't even call them characters. I call them people. The people inspire me, and their times inspire me, and their story inspires me first. And then I think it really is just what they are going through, what their situations are like. And I say for me, historical is particularly interesting because I get to enjoy all aspects of the research and the character development. And when I tell the stories, with hindsight, I seem to have, should I call this, let me be very careful with my choice of words. I seem to like to tell women character stories because for a number of reasons. I feel like, particularly in the eras that I write, we've always had the patriarchal version of the story.
Yeah.
Usually it's non-fiction as well, so it's a person who's lived their lives and now they're writing about themselves, or someone is writing about them to glorify them, and that is all we see.
Yeah.
So for me, I've always been interested in the voices that we are not hearing, what I like to call the voices in the margins of those stories. I really would rather know what the wife went through in 1964. I'd rather know what a girl in 1981 in Zambia went through. I'd rather find out those stories that I can't see, research, fill in those gaps with a bit of, with research, but also imagination, because there are many gaps that we will not be able to find in our on research desk. And that is where you let your imagination come and play. And that's what drives the stories I tell.
Okay.
So it's not so much an intention to change anyone. If they do, that's really, really great, and I'm happy for that. And hopefully it's a positive change. But ultimately, it's the story, it's restoring our history, it's retelling it, and it's giving voice to those who are not in a position to have voice at the time.
I think that's what I wanted to hear, because sometimes there are other storytellers rather that tell a story to maybe highlight GBV or poverty, whatever. But it's good that you brought out that you tell stories to project the voice for somebody from the past that did not have the opportunity to tell, or rather to say something or to depict who they are.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Who is the main target audience for the kind of stories that you tell?
So I don't write for a target audience per se, but in my writing, my hope is that, first of all, we are very rich in archive as a country, as a people. But there's a difference between it just sitting there in storage, opening it and looking at it as facts, and being able to present those facts, take those facts, and make them worlds that we now can live in.
Yeah.
So my target audience is anybody who's interested in our history, our culture, our stories, and wants to experience them as though they were there.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's basically taking the old and making it new, but hopefully not losing entirely what was there, but spinning it in a way that is palpable to our audiences, to our modern contemporary audiences. So it's not really an age thing, it's more an interest thing. People who are interested in those stories are the target audience I'm looking for.
Okay, so in short, your stories could be heard or read by anybody.
Anyone who has an interest in the eras I write, yes.
That gets me now to wanting to know more about your book, Nobi From Here. Could you just tell us what it is about?
So Nobi From Here is it's actually it's not a long novel. It's about two girls who are Zambian, each of them are half Zambian, half of something.
Yeah.
So, these girls.
I like the cover, it's really good.
Thank you very much. This work, why it's so meaningful to me is that it began at home. All of this was at home. Everything we designed and wrote, and although I did have collaborators, this began at home. So it's a work of love, this one. And it's about two cousins, one called Maggie, one called Pupe. But it begins with their grandmother in 1967, who has an accident. I can't say much else. Please get the book.
Yeah, please get
And the grandmother dies mysteriously right at the beginning in 67. But then the story comes forward to meet the girls who grew up in the 80s, 90s. One of them is in the UK, one of them is in Zambia. They're first cousins, and each of them are one is half Zambian, half Nigerian, one is half Zambian, half Jamaican. And the family just is very disunited. But the girls, they really long for each other. They're only children, each of them, and they just want the family to be together. So the story just goes on their journey of them. It's a coming of age too, but also just their desire to bring their family back together, their desire to understand why the family is the way it is, and their sisterhood, and how in the end, I can't really say what happens in the end, but it's a family story, it's a sisterhood story, it's a home story. So yes.
Now I'm curious, is it fiction or it's real?
It is fiction.
Okay.
Nobi From Here is fiction, but I did draw on my cultural heritage. Yes, which is Zambia, but also got a bit of Nigerian and Jamaican. So I wanted to explore that, and I just still did by creating these characters. So yes, it is fiction.
Okay.
Yeah.
And where can people get that? This lovely book.
Thank you. So people can get the book in Book World, any Book World, 37D Art Gallery, and Lusaka Collective at the moment. But we're looking to expand our distribution. But at the moment, you can please get the book from any of those places.
Okay. I understand you're a contributor on Reflections, an anthology of African and diaspora voices. What was that about?
Wow, so Reflections was a very interesting project, edited by a lady called Nana Brew Hammond, who's based in the States, and is published by HarperCollins through Harper Buyer. So she she basically curated 32, as you said, 32 African writers and diaspora writers of very high caliber, and it was very humbling when I was asked to contribute as well. I guess I think I'm the only Zambian in that collection.
Oh, nice.
But I did have a story. I think I was asked, do you have a story? And I was like, I've got a story I'm working with, but it's still like just bones. So I got a chance to complete a story, about a 9,000 word story. So it's a short story, of course, because being an anthology of that many people is quite big. And the story I wrote is called Her Sweetie, Her Sugar Cane. And it's about sisters again. I guess sisters keep coming up.
Yeah.
Her Sweetie, Her Sugar Cane. It's a love triangle story set in it begins in 1972, but they sort of have flashbacks to the 60s. And it's just a pivotal moment in the main character, Elizabeth's life. Her sister Chipo, they have to work through their feelings and their conflicts. So I'm not going to say much else. I hope you get to read it.
Indeed.
But yeah, so it's set in that time. And again, setting it in that time just means that a lot more of it is research, as much as it is developing the characters. And the greatest experience I had with that story was being edited by Nana, because I think it was the first time that I'm being edited for no, I shouldn't say traditional, but HarperCollins, and her editing process was it was over a long period of time, but it really was about getting to the heart and the emotion of your story, which was a new level, I think, in my writing journey, to understand that it's not necessarily about fancy words and like, you know, how the form or shape looks. It's also really about the heart and the emotional truth. So she was very inspiring, and it was really magical to work with her.
Interesting. How have you managed to market your publications internationally?
So like with No Be From Here, as I said, this book began from home. When I say home...
Before we get to that, why do you prefer having your publications or your works published internationally?
I don't necessarily think I prefer it. I think that's what happens. So like I'm saying, I start No Be From Here at home, in my dining room. Like I wake up every morning to write, or sleep late at night writing in my dining room. I finish it, I publish it from here at home. And home is what lifted this title. I wasn't sure what it would be received like, but the community really stood up for me and lifted this. It's not me who went looking. I think home looked out. And through that, it got the attention of an international publisher first. So, and I will also say that a good friend of mine, Banda, who during the time of lockdown, and that's the other thing, this particular story came out just when the pandemic began. So for someone looking outside, they'll say, whoa, this is a really bad time to publish, to come out with your first title. But what it did was other writers from around Africa began to have a virtual festival. So because everyone was locked inside, right? So suddenly there was that much more platform for the story, because I was just interviewing authors. In my eyes at that time, they were authors. I had just sort of tried with this thing, but I didn't know it would go as far as it went. At the time, I was just doing what I could to be part of the community, because they were so generous. And in that, the title began to get attention, so at home and outside, even though there was a pandemic. And when that happened, an international publisher approached me and said, could we publish this in South Africa? That was Blackbird Talks, the founder Tabiso. We had a meeting, I think a few months later, and she said, please, I want it. And then that publisher has gone on to make further collaborations in Canada and now the UK, where it will be coming out September 7th of this year. So I don't necessarily prefer to go outside, but the title found its way to new markets. I like to think of it that way.
And I think it's good, because then you are sharing the Zambian narrative with many other people around the world, and so to say that your books are not just meant for us Zambians, but they're meant for other people out there.
They're meant for people.
Yeah.
Like-minded people, hopefully, yes.
They're meant for people.
But having said that, it is important to me that we gain the tools we work hard to gain the tools to produce our own stories, and then trust that our stories will go where they're meant to go. Yeah.
Okay. I'm guessing in a way you have responded to how you manage to market your books on an international level.
That's true for the book, but for any aspiring writer right now, I will say there's no harm, not even no harm. It's important to try for, even if it's your short stories, to try for short story competitions. Start to look at them online. A lot of them occur around the same time in the year, every year.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very easy to just put together a spreadsheet, some kind of annual timetable for yourself, and know that, okay, every November is Commonwealth, or every September we've got Afritondo, or every January, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And begin to read the works that are coming out. They're free, they're online, they're there for you to read, to see what the other people are putting out around the world, not just here. And it's really important for us to get a lot more Zambian representation on those lists. And you just never know where it can take you as a writer, and who's reading, and everyone wants to read our stories too. So your story is very important.
Yeah. So you've heard. There's a tip for you. You ought to at least look out for short story competitions, especially if you're an aspiring writer. Free tip from Natasha. You know. Okay. How would you rate Zambia's literary position in the global space?
I think we really have a lot of work to do, and I think our representation is just almost, it's not enough. It's not enough. And it's also not entirely our fault, because I think our ecosystem needs to be developed. Yeah, not everyone can be an author, but we need more development in the ecosystem of what it takes to produce a book. What do I mean? We need more editors.
Yeah.
We need, and when I say editors, different kinds of editors, not one, not one person who says I do all these things, but
Mm-hmm.
we need our editors specialized. We need our development editors, we need our copy editors, we need our proofreaders, and we need a lot more training and support for people with those skills, who need to develop those skills, who've got that talent but need to develop those skills. We need a lot more assistance and support for our authors as well. Because I know, even just locally, we're not yet telling all the stories that we can tell. We are such a diverse nation. And I mean that from age, I mean that from geographically where we are in the country, I mean that from all the kinds of experiences we're having. We should not only be seeing one kind of story coming out. We have a lot more room, and I say this consistently, and I feel consistently that we need more structured support from the top and within private sector to develop this space, and then we'll have more inclusion and we'll have a much richer variety. And I think as a nation and society, we'll be richer for it. Yeah. So we need to do more.
We need to do more.
A lot more, yes.
Okay. Otherwise, we have come to the end of the program, but I've had a very insightful time having you. You have shared so much, very deep, I must. I think you're quite deep.
Thank you, Rina.
But knowledgeable, and yeah, it's
Thank
been really nice. So that is it. We have come to the end of Nkhani Zathu, Our Stories radio program. This program comes to you many thanks to Sochen Publishers in collaboration with Pan-African Radio. Now, Sochen Publishers is an independent publishing firm that is focused on developing, promoting, and producing Zambian and African stories that seek to share knowledge, values, and stories representing the Zambian and African narrative. Also remember that Nkhani Zathu, Our Stories, is currently open for sponsorship or any forms of partnership. So reach out on 0763 465255 and explore ways in which we can collaborate as we aim to take the Zambian and African narrative way forward. I've been your host, Rina Kasongo. Catch us again next week, Tuesday, on Pan-African Radio at 13:30 to 14 hours. Bye-bye.